Isn't it funny? You know, when I came here 17 years ago and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you?
Nigel Farage, the MEP who had campaigned to get Britain out of Europe, was enjoying his moment of triumph. But he was right. The European leaders weren't laughing now.
There's no hiding the fact that we wanted a different outcome.
I regret it deeply.
I have been surprised and impressed by the quite unprecedented degree of unity.
Those who leave the EU family cannot expect to keep its privileges without keeping to its obligations.
Everybody came out with exactly the same message, which was three things. So Britain has to get out fast because we can't be dealing with this uncertainty and we don't want contagion. They said we will not negotiate anything until Article 50 is triggered, which is the sort of the 2-year leaving process. And they said the 4 freedoms are indivisible.
In Brussels, David Cameron came to his last EU summit, apologetic, but putting a brave face on it.
Merkel's approach was, okay, we're going to close the lines, we're going to stick together, we're going to not integrate more, we're not going to talk about big plans about Europe and European common policy areas.
So whilst back in Britain, protest marches and the recriminations continued on either side of the argument, in Europe, leaders were battening down their hatches to try to solve the considerable problems facing the Union.
The creditor nations in the north are kind of set against the debtor nations in the south. The newer nations in the east are set against the sort of the older nations in the west over immigration.
There is no doubt that the euro has created a number of problems, and the 19 countries that belong now to the eurozone, in a number of cases, not all of them, have done really rather badly following the financial crisis.
Brussels is full of big institutions and big buildings. At the Commission, they think up the rules and regulations that bind the European Union together. This is the European Council, which represents the interests of the elected governments of the member states. In other words, the politicians. And they are hearing the call for change and reform, but they're not convinced the people in the Commission are listening.
Juncker said when he took office that this was the Commission of the last chance. Europe at the moment is facing a whole variety of crises, from the migrant crisis to a kind of continuing Eurozone growth problems, economic problems. There's the terrorist threat.
When you have economies that are not doing particularly well, you tend to have nationalistic movements anyway. We're finding that there's a lot more isolationism, nationalism, populism, which has in fact been showing its ugly head.
Euroscepticism is not exclusively British. Alongside the rise of right-wing parties, it is spreading across Europe. With crucial elections in 2017, leaders are well aware of the threat.
It's time for us to start telling Europe what we want from it, to give it a soul, because Europe isn't only Brussels. Europe is also made of the streets of Florence, of Rome, of our cities.
Italy has been under intense pressure from the hundreds of thousands of refugees landing on its shores over the last 3 years, combined with a sluggish economy.
Italy is particularly vulnerable because of its economy, which is really in the doldrums and has been in the doldrums for a long time now.
Prime Minister Matteo Renzi resigned in December after losing a referendum on constitutional reform, defeated by a wave of populist dissatisfaction. Now the country faces a period of political turmoil, which may lead to elections in 2017, creating more uncertainty for the European Union.
Germany, that is by now the only leader of the integration process, knows that UK is out of the game. France has major problems on the table, so Italy is the only possible partner, and they need a partner to go through.
European leaders collectively breathed a sigh of relief when the Austrian far-right candidate Norbert Hofer was defeated in the presidential elections. But in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders' Freedom Party, espousing similar anti-immigrant, anti-Europe views, is leading in the polls ahead of elections next March.
What was once unthinkable is now openly discussed here. France has always seen itself as one of the principal architects of the European project. But there has been a surge in anti-EU feeling, led by Marine Le Pen and her National Front. She will run in next year's presidential election and has offered the French people their own referendum on EU membership.
Brexit is perhaps the most important historic event in Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's a signal of liberty, of freedom, sent out to the entire world.
Those who voted for
Brexit and those who voted for Trump are the same people who would vote for Marine Le Pen. There is the same resentment, the same criticisms of the elite, immigration and Islam, the European Union, globalisation, free trade, etc.
Simmering tensions have spilled out into eruptions of violence throughout 2016. The same fears over immigration and globalisation which contributed to the Brexit also exist here, inflamed by terrorist atrocities.
I think all over Europe there is the fear that Marine Le Pen could win.
The international situation can have an effect. After Brexit, after Trump, people may think the right hasn't worked, the left hasn't worked, so let's try Le Pen.
If France would have a president called Marine Le Pen, it is obvious that the French-German X, or the French-German machine, as they call it, which was always essential for Europe to move forward, is going to die.
All across Europe, the Brexit vote was received with consternation and dismay. Sure, many member states had grown weary with the UK's constant complaining, but not many of them wanted them to walk away. Nowhere was the Brexit vote received with more regret than here, in the Union's strongest member state, Germany.
There's a lot of turmoil around Angela Merkel. She is seen to be the last woman standing, I should say, in Europe. She still has a majority in Germany, but of course we have elections in Germany in September 2017, and it's going to be very challenging for her, especially because of the refugee crisis we had in 2015 with more than 1 million people coming into Germany.
Protests by the anti-immigrant movement Pegida in Dresden were boosted by Angela Merkel's decision to allow refugees to come to Germany. The right-wing Alternative for Deutschland reached around 16% in some polls this year with its anti-EU agenda. But there is disbelief that Germany could once more go down the road towards fascism.
There's a very strong memory of what the Second World War was. There's still a lot of millions of people still alive who went through the war.
Germans are, with this post-war history, much less nationalistic as some other member states.
There is a collective awareness of where you can get if you vote or if you go down the road of populist, easy solutions.
For the last Brussels summit of a tumultuous year, Theresa May was not invited to the final dinner. For the European Union, Britain is history.
The only thing that matters for the EU, for its future, for its survival, for its solidarity, the only thing that matters is that Britain ends up with a significantly and manifestly worse deal.
Brexit has in a sense changed everything. Now there is a sense of urgent need for reform. There have already been some signs of movement, with Angela Merkel agreeing new rules that prevent new migrants from claiming benefits.
The irony is that if we'd stayed in and pushed hard enough, it seems not unlikely that there will be the sort of reform that a lot of people, including myself, would like to have seen. What we have done by pulling out has gravely weakened the European Union.
Are we fed up with Trump? Yeah, that's right!
Ironically, it may be that other great populist shock of 2016, the election of Donald Trump, that could draw Europe together.
If Trump delivers, for example, on his election campaign warnings that NATO may not be so important to the US, Europe will have to start thinking about its own defence. And that may well be the kind of thing in a changing, uncertain, fearful world that actually makes people realise, well, yeah, Europe is in fact important.
Europeans stick together if there's an enemy. That was certainly true during the Cold War. And George W. Bush, for example, for some people, he was just this kind of foe that helped Europeans to somehow feel they have a different identity or something like that. Perhaps Donald Trump is going to help the Europeans to find something similar.
As Putin flexes his military muscles on Russia's borders, Europe's old Cold War enemy may also become a unifying factor.
Russia's interest is in destabilising the European Union and weakening the European Union. Russia has already won the US presidential elections. Whoever wins in France, whether it's Marine Le Pen or François Fillon, which look like the two most likely candidates in the second round, Russia will have won there. Putin's tentacles are everywhere.
We can see it on the eastern borders of Europe. We can see Russia deploying more and more forces, literally on the borders of Poland and the Baltic states.
Next May, Europe will celebrate the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the Union. But will it survive the challenges that lie ahead in 2017? Some say now is the time to remember the conflicts of the past and remind ourselves why a united Europe seemed such a good idea to Winston Churchill in 1946.
We never had in Europe such a long period of peace. The peace idea is still there, and I think it's there more and more in these troubled times.